to talk about collaboration. So what I was going to do is talk a little bit about the class that I'm teaching to give a sense of what we're trying to do in the class, what we do in normal times, and then how it has changed in this time of COVID, and show the role that collaboration work has played in this course and how we have adapted to this COVID world that we are all in. Okay, so first, I'd like to start by acknowledging that at Harvey Mudd College, we do a lot of team teaching. And these are the people who have taught Chem 23 with me this past year. David Vosberg and Carl Haushalter and I taught together in the fall, while Hal van Rijswijk and Bill Daub and I taught in spring, last spring, and then again together this spring in the course. So the class I'm going to be talking about is Chem 23 A and B, Chemistry in the Modern World. This is one of Harvey Mudd College's core courses, which means it's required of all of our students, regardless of their major. And every year we have between 200 and 225 first-year students in this course. Chem 23A runs in the fall semester, and Chem 23B concludes the class in the spring. And Chem 23B is a half course, so we end a little bit earlier than the other classes. And in the last about 5 years, we've done a complete redesign of this class with an eye towards societal relevance and towards inclusive teaching methods. So the way that the class is structured is that it's a modular course, which each module focused on a particular societal question. And we are currently going through my very favorite module, which is the Tesla versus Toyota Smackdown. And this module asks, what will power the car of the future? Is it going to be Tesla's battery-powered cars with lithium-ion batteries, or will it be the Toyota model of hydrogen fuel cells? And this is an example of the way the class is structured. We teach fundamental electrochemistry, but through the lens of this question of the smackdown, and we apply that fundamental electrochemistry to understand lithium-ion batteries and hydrogen fuel cells. And so down here in red, I've highlighted Hal van Rijswijk because he was the author of this particular module. The faculty write all of the modules, and because it's a team, it becomes a manageable workload. So these are some examples of the modules that we've developed, the societal connection and the chemical content. I'll just highlight a couple. We teach thermodynamics through the lens of good Haber, bad Haber. We talk about Fritz Haber and the Haber-Bosch process, which makes fertilizer that feeds half the world. And we also talk about how Fritz Haber was a major champion of chemical weapons in World War I, and think about the responsibilities of a scientist even as we learn thermodynamics. A couple years ago, Carl Haushalter developed the Flu Harpoon, which is a module that teaches acid-base chemistry through looking at the 1918 influenza pandemic, which has proven to be a very timely module as we live through this past year. We learn advanced equilibria by talking about the Flint water crisis and get the lead out. And in the end of the course, we talk about the fuels of today, looking at CO2. We talk about the Tesla and Toyota Smackdown, and we talk about the fuels of tomorrow, thinking about affordable and clean energy, which is where we are heading actually right now with our students in the course. So the modules themselves are these large PDF files that are anywhere from 20 to 40 pages long, and they're self-contained for the students. So they contain an introduction, all the different learning objectives, what we want the students to take away from the module, as well as the assignments that we use to prepare for class and our in-class activities. So in normal times, when we teach the class, this is the basic workflow. One of our goals, in addition to the chemical content, is to help our first-year students develop the soft skills that are really necessary to thrive in college. And these include skills like asking for help and reading a textbook effectively. And to try to teach how to read the textbook, every class has a guided reading assignment that they complete before coming into our classroom. And these are graded for completion, not on correctness, to emphasize that this is a learning opportunity. We expect that they will make mistakes and have questions that they will bring to our class. In our 50-minute class period, we divide the time kind of like what I've shown here on the screen. We spend about 10 to 20 minutes in a large group discussion or interactive lecture. Then we do about 20 to 30 minutes of collaborative guided inquiry. And I'm going to be talking more about this, which is kind of the heart of today's exercise. And then we end with about 10 minutes of recap where the instructor goes through the problems that they've been discussing. And in normal times, the instructor would circulate through the classroom, working with different groups, responding to questions, as we've all done in our classes. And we do quite a bit of assessment as well. Every week we have a low stakes quiz, we have a problem set, and at least a couple days a week, we have minute papers to try to gauge student experience in the course. On the first day of class, we talk about this idea of teamwork. So Harvey Mudd really emphasizes collaboration, but this is something that's new to many students as they're coming out of high school. So we show them the slide on the first day. One of our goals is to learn to work in teams because this is how STEM works beyond college. But I always try to be honest with them about the challenges here and show them this cartoon. And I try to talk about how we try to move beyond what was my high school experience where group projects taught me to trust nobody. And we want to move them to this idea that group projects are a way of learning communication, responsibility, and this teamwork. Now, many of our students at Harvey Mudd are vectored towards the tech industry. And so we talk about teamwork through the lens of this Project Aristotle that Google ran a few years ago, where a team of researchers at Google wanted to understand why some of their teams were very productive and successful, but other teams failed. So they embarked on this internal study at their company. They looked at things like how formal were the teams, what were the memberships of the teams, across identity metrics, across ranks in the company. And what they found was that some of these structural factors were not as important, but the key turned out to be something that was in the academic literature, which was this concept of psychological safety. And teams worked best when everybody knew they could speak up, and teams worked well when the members were sensitive to how their teammates were feeling. And so we talk about this with students, saying that this is a skill you're likely going to need in your internship and in your careers. And to try to make this a little more concrete, we show them how does this work in practice? And so we talk about this idea of everybody contributes. If you're somebody who thinks by talking, you want to make sure you give others room to speak up. And if you're someone who's quiet and likes to listen and think a lot before you speak, you could challenge yourself to try to volunteer once in every class or once a week or so. We talk about listening to each other, not interrupting, and critiquing the idea and not the speaker. So we want to try to give them some of the tools that they'll need to make this class time when they're in groups a productive experience. I also want to say that we decided not to collect their in-class work and not to grade it, again, to emphasize that they're there to learn, to make mistakes, to ask questions without having the time pressure of completing something in 20 minutes and turning it in. So I'm just going to talk briefly about how we assign groups in person to contrast with what we've been doing in COVID times, where normally at the start of each module, students would draw a playing card, and that card would determine what group you were in, where you sit in the classroom. And when we would do jigsaw activities, we would again use the cards. We would tell students, write down your card number and suit. And then later we would say, if you drew a heart or a spade, do problem A. If you drew a diamond or a club, drew problem B, then come together and synthesize your work to make some larger conclusion. And then clearly we had to adapt this when we moved to remote learning. Before I talk about COVID, I just want to say briefly some of the things we learned about group work through these minute papers, because we've been surveying students about their group work experience for a couple of years. And some of the things we learned surprised me and have changed a bit how I think about group activities. So students would get this group work survey during the course. And what we would ask them how much they agree with these different statements. I feel I learn more when I work in a group. My group worked well together. I feel I need more guidance for my group work to be successful, or working in a group confuses me. And we found that students agree or strongly agree that they learn more when they work as part of a group. And one thing that always worries me a bit are these students who disagree or strongly disagree. It's less than 10% of the class, but because our assessment data are anonymous, we don't have a good sense of whether these are the same students all the time having a bad experience in the class, or if it is kind of changing based on the unit, based on the group composition. When we asked the students what parts of group work best helped them learn, the answers were kind of what we would expect. They learned through this process of shared confusion. Everyone is equally confused and we can work through it together. People appreciated it when their classmates brought a different perspective. It can be very illuminating. It might be something that the student does not personally understand, so they fill in each other's gaps. And they appreciated it when everyone is checking each other's work, answering each other's questions. Sometimes someone else asked a question I had too. Then the students appreciate when people talk and ask questions, chatting, and the people are normal, which is one of my favorite responses from our data set here. Now, a couple years ago at Harvey Mudd, we had some student protests on campus around issues of diversity and race in particular. And so after that, we started adding a question saying what aspects of group work are the least comfortable for you? And there were really two big themes that emerged. One was from introverts, where this is a representative comment. A student wrote, frequently there is little discussion when questions are done, and I have to take the initiative to start a conversation. And as an introvert, this makes me uncomfortable. However, as an introvert, I know I need to live with that. And we would hear comments like this pretty consistently, that for some people, it just takes extra energy, right, to engage in conversation, engage in group work, when you're also doing the high energy task of learning some complicated technical material. The other big theme was around embarrassment, largely around pace of work. And comments would be things like, sometimes I feel like I need more help than the others in my group, which makes me feel like I'm holding them back. The team members seem to know more, and they seem to get impatient with me when I'm going slow. I'm embarrassed about the fact that I don't understand the topic very well. And sometimes a person who has a lot of background knowledge will talk about how easy it should be, and make people feel bad by interjecting comments about how easy the lesson should be. And because we're seeing more and more about how student affect and embarrassment can impact learning, we've made some changes to try to deal with this. We've reviewed our group work strategies with the class. We've done iterative design of the course. So things that we've done are the first couple problems in group work now tend to be review of the pre-class. So students who are maybe less confident can do some of their chemical thinking ahead of time, and they're prepared to come in and have more of a conversation. And we've also implemented different sections where students can opt into a black section or a gold section, inspired by our colleagues in computer science, where students who maybe got a 5 on the AP exam or are very well prepared can opt into a black section. Students who would like a little bit, who are maybe less confident in their preparation, can go into the gold section. The content is the same between the two classes, but the pacing then has been more consistent within each group. And that has led to some improvements in our group work. Okay, so how did all of this change when we went to online learning about a year ago now? Well, we decided to stick with synchronous classes because we thought that there was real value in this collaboration that students were doing. We record our classes and there's no penalty for missing class. So students who have emergencies, who have internet outages that day, still have access to all the materials. And we put together a distance learning pod to support students in remote time zones, which I'll talk about more in just a moment. But we retained the fundamental structure of the class. It's still a highly structured class, there's a lot of moving parts, but it does give students built-in accountability for this kind of daily studying and rapid feedback that we know helps to promote learning. So for our collaborative work in Zoom, like many other people, we are using breakout rooms. And what we have done is each breakout room has a set of Google Slides that contains the group work for that day. So I had mentioned that our modules are these large PDF files that have all the questions. When we were in person, we would just have students print those out and bring them to class. But now, with many of our students working just with a laptop screen, it was too much for them to have Zoom up and a PDF file and something where they were taking notes or working on a Jamboard. So what we did was we put together these Google Slides for every class period. The title slide tells students what to do, to look at their breakout room number and find the slide that corresponds to that breakout room. And it looks something like this. There's the large number up front to say where they are. And then we have a title slide for every breakout room that lists the questions they're going to answer, and then has these sliding progress bars, where at the start of class, everything that is highlighted is have not started. And as students move through the questions, they move this little red box to indicate whether they are in progress or whether they are done with that particular question. And then each slide for every breakout room has the question that the students are going to ask. So here what the students are doing, they're calculating a Gibbs energy for a reaction. We're looking at the combustion of nitroglycerin. We give them all the values they need. This group has pasted in the equation they need, and you can see that they have done their calculation, reported their answer, and then commented on their answer. That yes, indeed, the combustion of nitroglycerin is hella spontaneous. And then after they've done a couple calculations, we ask them to do some chemical thinking, right? So compare the two answers. Why do we use nitrates and explosives? Well, because the reactions are so spontaneous, the heat output, and the very negative change in Gibbs energy. So what the instructor is doing while the students are in group work is with the Google Slides, we can put them in this kind of mode where we can see all the slides, and I can pretty easily scan to see how groups are doing by looking at these red bars. Normally, an instructor has 8 to 10 to 12 breakout rooms going for a particular class. And so if we were just trying to hop from one breakout room to the next, we don't really get to talk to everybody. Anyways, we don't get a good sense of how the class is doing. But in this way, I can just look through the slides and see how the class is progressing.
Sarah, so just to clarify, so you have one big Google slide that has the material on it 12 times and all the students, rather than, because I have done it, I always have like 12 different Google Docs, which is kind of a mess at the end, but they get their own. So you do one big thing. That's really interesting.
We do one big thing.
I love the sliders.
Yeah, we found that this works well if you have classes of no more than about 45. When we had more than 45 people, then then the Google Slides tended to crash. And then the instructor had to do 2 massive Google Slide files. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
But what this also let us do, though, was jigsaws were not working for us, where we would before do, hearts and diamonds, spades and clubs, do these different problems. But what we could do was odd numbered breakout rooms do part A, even numbered breakout rooms do part B, look at each other's slides, get the relevant answer, and do your synthesis. So it did let us do a modified kind of jigsaw. And while that did not really require cooperation within the group, it did require students to rely on each other's work. Yeah. And then you can see one slide here is bright yellow. And we asked students to change the background color of their slide when they needed help. So as I'm scanning through these, I can say, oh, group 4 really needs help. And sometimes changing the background color of their slide seemed like a lower energy barrier than clicking the ask for help button. So that was one thing that helped us out there. And then of course, like many other people, we've also been using Jamboards when students need to sketch. Sometimes what we will do is even put a link to a Jamboard at the bottom of those Google Slides. But what we found with Jamboards was we could only have 20 or 30 students on one before it crashed. So we needed multiple of those for some of our larger classes. So we did see some advantages to doing group work on Zoom compared to our online experience, or our in-person experience, excuse me. So when we had our playing card system, students were assigned to specific seats in the classroom. And sometimes students would need to be in a particular location. They need to sit in the front row to better concentrate or close to the door for whatever reason. And in that case, I would have to make one-off arrangements with the students, and we would both have to remember each time, okay, this person needs to sit in this place, so these are the arrangements I have to make. But Zoom kind of got rid of that issue. A big advantage for me is that for the first time, I can really see how every group is moving through the group work. Because by circulating, I kind of get an informal feel, but now I actually have a record from 3 semesters of courses about what problems got the students hung up and when they were really able to get through everything I hoped that they would get through. Also, this is a first-year class, and many of our first-year students are feeling kind of isolated. It can be tough to make connections with your peers when you are all separate during this remote time. So being in the group work, in the groups, helped them kind of get to know each other at least a little bit. Some of the challenges on Zoom, when we were in person, we never really had to assign roles in the group. You are the leader, you are the note taker, that kind of thing. But when we were online, we found that students often had trouble starting the conversation in their breakout rooms. And so we had to switch to saying, this person is going to be the team leader. If your first name is closest to the end of the alphabet, you're going to introduce yourself first, introduce everybody, and get the conversation going. Group work also takes a lot longer in Zoom than it seems to in person. Kind of like class, we're getting through a little less material than we would in 15 minutes in person. And yeah, so we've had to kind of scale back, move some material to pre-class or homework that we hadn't done before. And these jigsaw tasks that we had so carefully designed were very difficult to implement. And so we had to make some big changes there. Now, when we first started using Zoom a year ago, we tried very hard to do pre-assigned breakout rooms so students could be in the same group every time, but Zoom was not cooperating for technical reasons. This year in the fall, my students so badly wanted to have some consistency in their groups that I told them, okay, I'm just going to pause class for a couple minutes and manually put you in your breakout room so you can have that consistency. And we just did that for a little bit. Now with the updated Zoom, students can choose their own breakout room, which has been glorious because I just can put a list up on the screen that says, here's your name, here's your room, and they can opt into their own room. And in that way, we can have consistent groups over time, which helps them get to know each other. We've been pretty deliberate this semester too about doing a better job with gender balance in our groups. We found the last couple years, and for the first time, I've had individual conversations with students who are reporting some kind of gender issues that are emerging in their groups about not being listened to or not being heard. And so this new pre-assigned rooms helps us to make sure that there's at least two people, two women in each group, for example. And so that's something I hope we can carry forward when we go back to our in-person classes. How do we think about balanced groups if we're going to do this random playing card thing? We might need to reevaluate there. And then time zones. That has, of course, been one of the really big difficulties because all of us have students in our classes who are 10 or 12 hours removed from where we are and might be staying up all night. And if you have questions too or comments, please do put them in the chat. I can't see your faces, but if you have a blue hand, you could always raise that too. So for the time zones, what we did was we put together a distance learning pod where last spring, when we were first going remote, we gave students the chance to sign up for this distance learning pod. And the way it worked was that these students in the pod would self-organize. They would watch the class videos, they would work together to do the in-class work, and they collaborated on homework and they collaborated on their studies. And we gave them extensions to do the homework. So if we posted a class video at noon on Wednesday, they had 24 hours to watch the video and turn in the homework. So they had the same opportunity to see that material as their peers who were in class that day. And then one of the instructors would hold a weekly late night office hours to work with the pod. And this was scheduled based on the students' availability. So it was Hal Van Rijswijk last spring. He offered some times in the late evening or early morning, and based on what the students said, he set the office hours. So a representative student last spring sent this feedback. I'm rather missing the bi-weekly chemistry distance class and office hours. I wanted to let you know that the ChemProf's distance learning response was by far the most accommodating and actually helped me engage with the material better than before. So for that and for your understanding, thanks so much. And the credit here really goes to Hal Van Rijswijk, who was the one working most closely with the distance learning pod last spring. Now we've continued this practice for 3 semesters now. So what we found was last spring in 2020, the students had been at Harvey Mudd for 1.5 semesters before we went remote. So they had fully acclimated to this culture of collaboration. They knew each other well, and the distance learning pod functioned just beautifully. They were very accustomed to the class and to working together. This fall, again, we offered students the option of a distance learning pod, but fewer students opted to participate. I think there was a sense that students really wanted to be with their peers. They did not want to miss out on anything, and they were already had their sleep schedules offset for their other courses. So it seemed like very little return to do this for chemistry. And while we held evening office hours, they were not well attended last fall. This spring, there was a wonderful structural change where sections of our first year courses are offered in the evening. And students who are in distant time zones can sign up for those sections. And we've had better luck with the distance pod this term because students have signed up for this evening class. They have about a semester under their belt, and this class time really functions more as a tutorial than a real class. There's a lot of one-on-one interaction, but here, even though it's a small group, there's about 6 of them, there are still a few students who go and attend, but they don't really engage as deeply as some of the others do. So there's still some adjustment to the collaboration at Harvey Mudd that's going on. but the structure of a section in the evening really seemed to help get this off the ground in a class where students had not been on campus to acclimate to the culture here. Okay. So that's the overview of what we've been doing with trying to make collaboration work in this remote world and across the different time zones. And one of the things I wanted to have a chance to discuss with all of you was something I've been thinking about a lot, which is as we acclimate to, as we return to a post-COVID world, what of our practices are serving us well that we want to return to? What are some things that we were doing before that we might be able to let go of? And is there anything we've learned about teaching, about collaboration, that we want to carry forward, even when we are back together in person? And so I was hoping we could spend a little bit of time, thinking about this question and discussing it. I had our own set of slides ready for us to do in a breakout room, but I think with the size that we have now, I don't know if we actually need to do the breakout rooms, or if we could probably just stay in this main room and talk for a few minutes. So
yeah, do you want to drop the Google Slides in the chat and we can all log in or take a look in there? Yeah. Or we can talk amongst ourselves here in our main room.
I'll put the link here in the chat so we can then all see the questions. And I'll also put the questions in the chat.
Fabulous. I will pop in and say these questions are so wonderful because the CTL is planning on hosting an event in late April that is a panel discussion among faculty who have found something that they want to take from this crazy virtual remote time and bring into their in-person teaching. So if anyone has something they think they'd like to share more broadly with the community, we'd love to get in touch with you and see if you want to sit on our panel.
This time has forced us to make so many changes when sometimes it can be slow in our institutions, right? And I hope we don't just revert back to everything we were doing before, but can be kind of mindful in what we choose to return to.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff I do not want to do again, but there are a few things I think we can take with us.
Yes.
So Sarah, do you ever assess the group work you do on Google Docs and stuff? Because that would be a thing against using one big.
Jump in for a second. Sorry, Steve. I'm Sarah. I'm the program coordinator.
You're Sarah and you're Kathy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm blind. And then I apologize. My daughter was calling me with her latest college acceptance or non-acceptance news. So I apologize for being on the phone there for a second at the end. Kathy, I apologize. And I really still on the Google Docs things. We use that all the time. Do you ever use that for formative assessment to give a little more kind of not pressure, but like kind of emphasis or importance that you want students to do a good job on these kind of in-class problem sets or other things? That's one thing we've been kind of experimenting with kind of mixed results.
Yeah. I would say that our first offering of the class did a lot of assessment with the in-class work, and that proved to be very stressful for students and burdensome to instructors. Mm-hmm. We've maybe gone a bit too far the other way, where we have the students do the work, but we don't give them grades for how well they do. And maybe a middle ground would be one graded problem that they turn in. But what we do is we have the solutions posted to all of these. Mm-hmm. We go over the solutions together as a large group, and the in-class work is inspiration for homework or quizzes. So there's incentive to take a look.
And does this class have an exam that scaffolds onto these problem sets? Because they seem, they're very mathematical and so forth. So
yes.
There's an incentive there. Okay.
Yeah, we have exams, and we've been doing quite a bit of assessment here.
And you do report outs too, I take it, from these group activities, or are they mostly you just go over it at the end?
It depends on the nature of the activity. If it's a numerical exercise, then typically I go over it as the instructor, but sometimes these activities are discussion based. So chemical meaning out of this, or think about some kind of societal application, or so here's an example. We do an exercise where we ask students to look at different fuels and choose which one is best. And so then reports out, what did you choose as your best fuel and why? And
Mhm.
you think of the metrics we use to measure best.
Because I personally find the report outs is one of my best strategies to get kind of shyer students to talk, because I almost always will call one, because they worked on it, they usually can talk about it, and it's not as high pressure as a cold call or something like that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I like to give students some time to think before I cold call them myself, so
Yeah.
to choose a spokesperson or something like that.
Yeah.
But
I love the way you have the
just-
sliders. I have those sliders. I was taking notes. I'm going to send it to it. I love that idea on the one big document, because I always have separate documents and I just visit the rooms all the time. It's the only way you know what's going on. And this seems like it scales so much better. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And Corey, did you have a hand?
Yeah, thanks. So I teach philosophy at CMC, and so I've been just this throughout. I've been thinking about how to map the sorts of things I use small group work for onto this structure. So here's a situation that comes up a lot for me in Zoom teaching, and I wonder if you can say a little bit about how you think what you might do for the distance pod. So often there will be one instance of group work that sets up another one, right? So we'll do a conversation in small groups and then come back and compare notes as a whole class and all try to draw some upshots out of that, right? Like, I asked you to think about whether you were convinced by this philosophical argument, and then based on what the groups say, I'll sort of extract, okay, like here were the main objections that different groups had. Now go back into groups and choose one of those to try to reply to or to strengthen or something like that, right? Where there's some work that's happening as a whole class in between the two exercises that makes the second one possible. So I wonder if you have situations like that, and if so, how does the distance group, how do they work together on the second one, given that you're not in a position to in real time sort of get the results of the first one and process them?
That's a really good question. We have not had to grapple with that because the way we've been doing it, it's been more kind of the other way where it's large group, small group, large group again. I think the way we would have handled it is we would have given special instructions to the distance learning pod saying, do this first set of exercises, then pause, watch the class video from 20 minutes to 30 minutes, hear the report out, and then do the second set of questions. So we would have had to rely on them doing that after the whole class discussion.
Yeah, I see. That's really helpful. So chunking up the video into parts rather than treating it as just here's class time. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I was just thinking about these questions, and I think there's a lot I would leave behind and a lot I missed, but trying to think about the part that I might carry forward. And I'm curious if other people have an answer to this. I think there's some benefit in like the constraint of the medium we're in, like Zoom or something like that, where some things that are easy in class is like, oh, turn to your neighbor, have a higher sort of barrier. But then like, are there good things that come from that constraint? And are there ways that like we can, like, would it be helpful to design in-person activities as if they were on Zoom? And would those constraints like make the activities clearer or more engaged or something like that? It's not something I've thought about deeply, but I wonder if anybody else has had thoughts about that.
So one thing that, Kathy, do you want to respond first?
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
One thing like this that comes to mind for me is it seems like compared to in person on Zoom, students will more frequently lose track of how one thing we're doing in class is related to another thing we're doing in class. And so I've just spent more time doing like transitional, like here's just a couple minutes of context or what we did last time or how, and so I think that there's no reason not to do that in person. It's just that the circumstances didn't like make it so salient to me that I needed to do more of it. So that's one thing I want to carry forward.
Yeah, that's such a, like, just making the connections clear to students. And it reminds me of what Kathy was saying earlier about students needing in the Zoom environment a little more instruction on what roles to play. Like you're the leader, you're the note taker, you're something like that. And I bet that could be really helpful, especially for first year students, to kind of like, what are the things we do in group work and making those structures more clear.
I mean, to me, the number one thing I've done tons more is just pre-scaffolded breakout material using Google Docs. Before, I never used that. Sometimes I'd pass something out in class, but now almost everything is pre-scaffolded, where here's the table you're going to fill out, here's some of the information. I like, for example, I teach a class on global health policy where I had some great breakouts where I would actually have a different breakout for every group, where they would look at health outcomes in different regions of the world with a similar number of questions and have them, and they love that. But again, it was all organized in advance on Google Docs. So it was sort of on Rails, sort of, with different answers. So I've done a whole lot more of that than I ever did in the kind of in class type thing, where it was a lot more just tons of open discussion and just some breakouts, but fewer. Where now I use breakouts all the time because I just know the more you lecture, the more they multitask. And especially on Zoom, I find that like the open discussion case-based stuff doesn't work very well with 40, 50 students on Zoom. I've been using the Minerva platform a lot too, which we're moving away from at KGI, but that makes it a little bit easier, but even still, it's not great. It's easier to pull people up on screen on the Minerva thing. But the Zoom classroom is coming out, might make it a little bit easier, so that maybe that'll help. But I really love doing it all. I'm going to really try that, everything on one big Google Doc, because I spend so much time creating 8 Google Docs, and I use them over and over again. But still, it's just such that, and I love the sliders. That seems like it really works. And the coloring the page, I love that idea too. I think that is, especially for a large class, it seems great.
And just the idea of like making visible where students are in the process is something I'd love to do in in-person classes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hopefully not in a way that sort of like outs them as behind. I have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a drawback to us not collecting their group work. And so maybe there's a way to do that. Yeah.
And I completely agree that it's really hard to move people around in class. I usually have a seating chart. So when I do breakout groups, it's always the same little clusters all the time. And there's not a lot of vibrancy in that after the second or third time. And I have made people, to make people move, like I do stand tallest to shortest sometimes if it's a long one. I do things like that, but it's just really time consuming. And online, you just press a button and there you go. So I agree with you in that too, Kathy. I thought that was a really good point. I mean, all these points, this really, thank you so much.
Oh, really glad it's helpful. Yes, it's a lot of physical setting up for our in-class group work because there's signs on every table about what card goes where that you set up and then collect.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying at KGI to get the STEM faculty to just stop lecturing, and it's so hard. So I thought some of your examples are really good, and you can just see how much upfront work goes into making things contextualized and societally relevant and just getting these things done. And so yeah, it was really interesting seeing what you've done.
Thanks. One of the things that I'm personally hoping we can carry forward is a better, more editorial eye about what questions are group work worthy. I think in our iterations of the class, we would do a lot of calculation type questions where there's no reason you have to be in a group to do this. Yeah. And, the more discussion type questions we have, or questions where maybe a representative calculation, explain how you set it up instead of just the plug in the numbers, I think is something I hope we do more.
Yeah, I think that connects to like the constraints of the system being like, it's a little more tedious to do group work this way, or you need all this background work like Steve was saying. And before it was really easy to be like, turn to your neighbor, make a group of 4. And it was a way to like kill some time in class, but it wasn't necessarily in service of student learning. And so this
Mhm.
idea of constraints and what's a group worthy problem is helpful and something to consider in the future.
Mhm.
The other thing I've found, I've done a lot of teaching on this Minerva platform, and then more recently we've been just using Zoom a lot, is open discussion. And I do kind of social science with a lot of some mathy stuff in my classes, but there's a lot of kind of case-based discussions and things too. Is one thing I started doing online that was probably the number one things people commented. I teach 3 sections of a big class in the fall. Is that before I teach a lot, I grade a lot in class participation. It's like a third of the grade. And they feel all this pressure that they've got to talk every class. And then I have either, now I just do it myself on recordings, so I used to have TAs, and I give everybody a score every time they talk, which students I don't like but kind of hate. And I just take their highest score out of the whole day. So they can mess up all they want to say something smart once. And most of the students like that, but there'd be some students that just hate that. And what I started doing online this year, because I could, is I would have an open response question where they would type an answer. And it would be off the study guide for my class almost always. And I'd start the class with it. And I'd use the responses to start the discussion. But so many students, they said, this is what we want in all your classes. The pressure feels like it's off. And I would grade that for class participation. So everybody would have something. And, if they read this stuff, and, it'd always be something that you had to know what you're talking about, or you're not going to get it right. So you rewarded being prepared. And then they felt like they can talk freely. And the real introverts didn't feel like there was a gun to their head the whole time. So that's one thing online that was much better on. It's a lot harder on Zoom, but I've been working on that. You can use open chat. It's hard to keep it private because it's always on chat is the problem. But I think that's one thing that I personally found in terms of kind of universal design. Kind of you want participation, but some people really are shy, and you can get participation in different ways online sometimes, where it's hard. I mean, in class, I guess you can have them write out the answer or something like that, but I just like they type. So that's just another example.
I just want to pick up on something that's in the chat about one of the nice things with the Google Slides is this, that you can preserve them. And that is something we've done. At the end of every class, I download the day slides as a PDF and I post them at a place where students can go back and look and say, this is where we were in my group. We had this note here. Yeah. And the nice thing I will say that about the slides instead of the doc is when you have a doc that a lot of people are working on, someone makes a change at the top and everything shifts, but the slides are really self-contained. So even if somebody's messing up on slide number 2, whatever, it doesn't affect me on slide 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then one question, just because I can ask on the time zone thing, which you mentioned a few times. Did you have students that we have a couple students in China, and I just had them stop coming to class at the end because it would be like 3 a.m. and they're in China. It was just, you can see the look of dread in their eyes. So I ended up basically letting them watch the videos, and then I would chat with them once a week, or I would give them some extra stuff to do to make sure they're doing the class. But it was that to me was the number one challenge. Did you have any things like that where it was just almost impossible because the China one was the hardest for me? India and Europe was doable because it's ahead of us. And we always had a morning section for these classes. But the China one, like the 9 a.m. class is 12 midnight in China, and anything later than that is later. And so they could do a couple classes maybe at the end or the beginning of the day, but that's it. So did you have a policy or a strategy for that?
Yeah, we recorded all the classes so students could watch it at their leisure. And then with this distance learning pod, a lot of the participants were in China for sure.
Okay, and I might have missed that. I'm sorry. My
no.
daughter, she's doing college, and she keeps getting waitlisted by these UCs, so she was on the phone crying. So I apologize.
No, of course, it's an important conversation. No, don't worry at all. Yeah, so what we did was students who were in those remote time zones could form their own small group that would meet asynchronously. And then there was, they met with an instructor at a special office hours once or twice a week to go over the material.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that. That's
no. I'm at that point of the semester too, where
No. I don't know. Like I have a high school senior and like she got accepted to the first 2 places she was. So she's got 2 places to go, but since then, every other one has been a wait list. Like she just got waitlisted from UC Santa Barbara today and she got Irvine yesterday and I think they're all gonna be waitlisted. So I keep thinking, you got 2 places to go, don't worry, you're okay, and they're both good. But it's lots of teen stress in my house. So like every day I get this panic phone call and it's my daughter like, I gotta take this. So anyway.
So it's a very uncertain time.
For sure.
Does anyone have any closing thoughts or anything they want to bring in to wrap up?
Just want to thank everybody for the conversation. I really appreciate hearing from people. And
Before you all go, I'd love to remind you of a few upcoming CTL events we've got going on. On March 23rd, we have a anti-racist lecture where Marta Gonzalez is going to share some pedagogy she's developed from artivistas, so people who use art and activism intertwined. And then on April 7th, the CMS athletics coaches have formed a learning group around diversity and inclusion and equity. And they're going to share some of the readings they've done and how it's helped them to move forward their thinking. I'll drop the CTL, the RSVP forms for both those events in the chats, and we'd love to see you there. And again, we're developing a panel on a lot of the things we talked about here on what we're going to bring with us from the pandemic and remote teaching into in-person teaching. So if you're interested in being in that panel, you can email us at ctl@claremont.edu. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sarah, I appreciate it. Okay, thank you, Sarah, so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was lovely. I actually learned a lot, and it's really nice to think about the future.
Oh, yes, yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.